The Chinese carbon bike has been built, but there are some finishing touches that need to be applied just to give it that final wow factor. So in this video, we will give her that final bit of TLC that she deserves. Let's start by looking at the chimney above the stem. Now, the reason I left this so long was to make sure that I can adjust it in the future when or if I have a bike fit. And I promised myself that I would chop it down like a lumberjack in his prime once a bike fit was complete. So the time has come, my friends. Let's lose the chimney. And yes, that does mean there is a full bike fit video coming soon on this bike. So first things first, I am going to have a 5mm washer on top of the stem to give me the compression that I need to compact the headset. So off came the top cap, the spacers and the compression plug so that we can get a closer look and measure what we need to do. Now the compression plug gives us an extra 2 to 3mm on top of the height of the steerer tube, so we need to account for that. So if I cut the steerer tube flush with the stem as it is, we then have an extra 2 to 3mm added to the steerer for the compression plug. Then we can add a 5mm spacer which will raise higher than the compression plug. It should, in theory, be compressed perfectly. Now this time around, I'm going to cut the fork steerer on the bike because the forks can't be dropped out of the frame because all of the routed cables. These routed cables are fun. Many people mentioned in the comments on the full build video that carbon dust was created by the devil. So on went the safety mask this time around, and I'll also be adding water throughout the cut to prevent the dust particles from making a beeline into my lungs. I'm saying this so you don't randomly think that I'm having a water fight with my bike. I do have better things to do in my spare time. Well, maybe not. So first I make sure the mark where we want to cut is nice and visible. Then I loosen the stem bolts and wiggle it off, leaving the protruding shaft exposed. This isn't ideal cutting as the forks can actually move, but with a bit of manoeuvring and playing with the right angle, I got into a good position. Now I cover the bike with rags so that water doesn't get everywhere, and I shove some sponge down the stem as well to stop water going into the forks. Now I also tied the bars out of the way so that I don't damage them. Now I lined up the cutting guide on the forks, which was actually really hard because of the cables. These damn cables.
Rigid and inflexible.
Slowly but surely I managed to cut through the fork steerer. Now I was spraying water to reduce the carbon dust, as I said, in the air, and it went pretty well. As you can see, it did a good job. All the carbon was collected in clumps, or it was on the saw blade, etc., which means they weren't in the air. Again, the key with this cut is trying to get it level. It's hard not to get it level with the guide. Now a quick going over with the file to remove any excess fibers and neaten everything up. The cut is looking good. Stem back on with a bit of carbon grip, the compression plug back in and torqued up correctly to 6Nm. You can see that we have a good height with the compression plug sitting proud of the stem. Then we can put the washer on, and then the top cap can go back on and be tightened to take up all the play. And there we have it, my friends. We have gone from large ugly chimney to streamlined, almost flush 5mm spacer. Adjusting the shifters. Now firstly, I need to set up the brakes and gears again. This is because I had to undo all of the cables when I went for a bike fit a few weeks ago. Now in order to remove the stem, you need to loosen all of the cables so you have some play in the cable housings to pull the stem off the fork steerer. Before I get the cables all set, I'm going to adjust the position of the levers to the final resting place, which is pretty much as high as they can go on these bars. Now nothing like getting your hands around the rubber hoods for the first time. Now I like to slightly point the levers inwards as this feels a little bit more comfortable on my wrist. The reason I'm doing this first is so I know how much cable housing I have to play with and how much I need to try and hide in the frame. And what we don't want is a big old bulge on the outside of the bars where we haven't pushed enough cable through. I then tighten the clamping bolt down to 5Nm. I can see why people go for hydraulic brake systems and electric wireless gears. Now on the topic of hydraulic brakes, a little something came in the post today. I wonder what that could be for. Someone's been shopping on AliExpress again. Now with the shifters in place, I can tackle the brakes. Let's start with the front. Now we don't need to center the caliper again because we did that in the full bike build video. So first, we will pull all the slack out of the cable and tighten the anchor bolt down. With a little adjustment, we were good to go. I hadn't actually changed the pad position, so that's why it was pretty good from the start. I can now do the same with the rear brake, which should have been the exact same process, right? However, I could not get the cable into the caliper because it is so stiff. So off came the wheel and I tried again, still no luck, couldn't get the angle. I had to undo the mounting bolts to get the correct angle. Now once I got the cable into the caliper, I pulled through any slack and tightened the anchor bolt down. What a palaver. I had a little play with the pad adjustment screw to make sure that the wheel could spin freely with no bite from the pads, and also that the brake lever had the correct distance to travel to apply the brakes. It's all about creating that fine balance so you have the perfect lever pull to stop your machine and your heavy arse sat on top of it. The gears. Now I had to do a little bit of cable routing for the front gear cable as it slipped through the frame. Of course it did. As I have experienced and will continue to express, the amount of enjoyment these cables have given me is endless. Now first, a spare bit of cable was shoved from the bottom to the top. This was the easiest thing to actually get through the frame. It looks quick in the footage, but hunting for a hole basically blind took a while. Then with the cable through, I put some cable guide over the inner cable and then removed the inner cable, leaving me with the cable guide. I then used the guide to feed the actual gear cable through the frame. Literally cables through guides through cables. I flicked the gear into the smallest cog at the lever, as this is where the cable has the most slack. I pulled the slack through and tightened it with the anchor bolt. Remember, the front derailleur has already been set up, so it's the correct height and correct angle to the chain rings. So this was from the previous video where we've done the full bike build. I'm not going to lie, cable gears seem to forever need adjustment, but with some tinkering and some more tinkering and some more tinkering than I would have liked, the front derailleur was all set up again. Onto the rear, and it's the same situation. The high and low limit screws are set. It's just getting the cable tension correct. Some adjustment here and there. I got the gears all indexed and clicked through all the gears correctly. It's like a perfect symphony. Well, maybe not a perfect symphony, but you know, use your imagination. Onto the bar tape, which I normally don't like doing, but after the struggles with the routed cables, this honestly feels like a walk in the park. I started by adding electrical tape to the bars to keep the cable housings in the correct position. When wrapping the bars, I start at the bottom, making sure that I'm wrapping the bar tape from the outside in, which goes with the way that your hands will be pushing on the tape when you are on the drops. So if anything, over time, the bar tape will get tighter, not looser. Now I made sure to leave enough at the end for the bar end plug to grip. Now I like to do a few wraps and put the end cap in and make sure it's all good, otherwise you have to undo loads just to sort out the end cap. Around the shifter, I like to add an extra bit of tape to make sure that all sections of the bar will be covered. Now there wasn't an extra strip provided with this £5 AliExpress bar tape, no surprise, so I just cut a section off of one end. We then use this sort of figure of 8 technique and come up and over the bars. This is to ensure that we are then wrapping from front to back on the tops. We tend to pull back when we are on the tops, and we want the bar tape to match the force that we are going to apply to the machine when we're putting down 1500 watts minus 1000. In mesmerizing fashion, I bodged the bar tape onto the bars and finished it off with some black electrical tape. Alas, we have something to grip and the bar tape is complete. I repeated the same process on the other side. Don't be too mesmerized by my guile and speed. It turned out pretty decent and I'm happy with the result. This cheap AliExpress bar tape doesn't exactly feel strong. In fact, it's pretty weak. So we'll see how it holds up. Bottle cages. Now, when I was scrolling through AliExpress, I noticed these bottle cages and I thought, fully magnetic? I can be the guinea pig, so you find people know if these are trash or treasure. Now to install them, it's the same as any normal bottle cage. I grease the threads, which is a good habit as you don't know when you'll be taking these screws out again. I must admit, these bottles do have a satisfying click into place.
Is that good?
My main concern though is hitting a pothole and one of these bottles goes flying. After installing one, this probably isn't going to be any good. The bottle can rattle just with light pressure, so when you are pumping it out in the wilderness, I think that this bottle is going to rattle. I went to install the second bottle and the frame bolts aren't long enough. Despite trying to raid all my other bikes, there was no bolt in sight that was suitable, so I'll stick with one for now and see how it holds up. I also bought this carbon mount from AliExpress, which was $13. Now with these integrated bars, there's obviously no bolts on the front of the stem to connect a mount to, and the overall shape of the tops means you can't connect a circular mount on those. So the solution is this 2-bolt mount system under the stem. This is how I mounted this little beauty and secured it nice and tightly with the 2 bolts. I must admit, you got a lot in the package. It's a pretty good deal for $13. Now it seems pretty stable and solid as well. I'm not going to be dangling off it anytime soon, but I'm sure it can hold a pretty hefty GPS in place. Now, I then realised that the extra bolts that came with the GPS mount also fit in the frame, and they are longer. So I chucked the other bottle cage to complete the Aero look. I'm going to have to make this a habit, aren't I, when I complete a bike build video, is a polish montage. Ride, review and full bike fit video is coming very soon, so do subscribe to make sure you don't miss them. Check this video out to see the full build process and watch me make some big mistakes and learn some things and have a laugh along the way. I'll see you soon, you winter hermits.